Wind scrapes the badlands into knives. A wagon lies split in a salt-white wash. Vultures tilt and circle as heat shimmers above a dry river, where a woman's labor cries are the only sound. Clara Winfield, a young settler wife abandoned with a cracked axle, 2 empty canteens, and pain tearing through her belly, is about to bear twins with no water, no shade, and no help. Her husband rode off to scout before dawn and never returned. Coyotes call. Contractions close like a fist. She delivers the first child alone, the second breaking her open, when a lone rider crests the ridge at dusk, and the glint on his lance says he is no savior. This tale survives in a sheriff's deposition, where one name was scratched out, and a wagon inventory shows a husband's signature beside 2 canteens sold for urgent cash. Next, you'll see why that single erasure and that sale changed everything. The rider came down the slope at a careful angle, letting the horse pick its steps, dust puffing at each hoof like ghost breath. He did not point the lance. He held it under his arm, then slid from the saddle and laid the weapon on the ground, as if setting a stick on a doorstep. He lifted his hands to show they were empty. He was lean, with a scar like a pale finger laid across the skin of his forearm. His braid was neat. A small disc of shell hung at his throat. He looked at the babies, then at Clara's face. She tried to lift the broken axle. It weighed as much as a sin. Coyotes drew closer in a scalloped crescent, patient, as if they knew time always ate what the sun gave it. He knelt. He touched 2 fingers to the earth near Clara. Not on her, not on the children, but near. A gesture that looked like a prayer or a promise. He set a small parfleche bundle under the wagon's torn shadow and opened it to show a folded flap of rawhide that could make shade. He moved slowly, letting her see each motion. His mouth held a name. Chaska, he said, tapping his chest lightly. He pointed to the twins with his open hand, not his finger, the way one points to something holy. Water, Clara said. The word was a scrape in her dry throat. He nodded, squatted low, and crawled to the lip of the wash where the riverbed turned chalk white and brittle. He pushed aside a crust of salt with his fingers, patient as a badger, and the ground bled a dark spot. He waited. The dark spot grew. He cupped a little into a tin at his belt and brought it back, offering it to her first, then to the older twin, then to the younger, who whimpered in sleep and sucked air as if he could drink the world. Clara drank 1 finger's depth and no more. She held the tin to the first boy's lips and tipped it slowly, 1 swallow, then 1 for the other, then the last mouthful for herself. The taste was mud and iron. It tasted like life feels when you almost lose it. Thank you, she said, in a voice that still shook. I will fight you if I have to. Don't make me. Chaska inclined his head, moved the rawhide flap to shade the babies, and wedged the broken axle so it kept coyotes from jumping straight into the wagon bed. He took his lance again, only to stand it upright, point down, so the metal was a promise to himself and not a threat to anyone else. The Badlands accepted the arrangement for now. The heat slackened by a hair. The vulture ring widened as if thinking it over. Clara's eyesight steadied. She bound the first twin in torn skirt cloth and the second in the blanket she had meant for both. Blood was stuck to her legs. When she tried to sit, she almost fainted. Chaska looked toward the ridge, then the flat. He made a small sound with his tongue, and the horse came, patient, trained. He did not try to lift Clara. Instead, he broke off dead sage, stacked it to block a little wind, and used the lance to lever a better angle under the wagon wheel. The baby on Clara's chest hiccuped. She laughed once, harsh and bright, and surprised by how it lived in her. Then she cried into the baby's hair, because laughter can open the same door that tears use, and the door was already off its hinges. She slept with her cheek on her own arm, and in her sleep she dreamt of a ledger. She did not know why. Lines of ink ran like narrow rivers. One word was scraped so thin, the paper bruised. A hand she knew wrote a name that a second hand did not want existing. In the dream, the second hand pressed so hard that he nail split. When she woke, the dream clung like a cobweb. Silas, she said. His name made the air taste like copper. Chaska found the seep again and widened it, working with the patience of someone who had grown up where water played tricks. He sang softly at one point. The song was not for Clara. It was for himself, and maybe for the babies, if they liked the sound of breath turned into a steady line. When he stopped, the wind seemed to listen for more. He watched the sky and the ridge and the flat in turn, counting time, the way a man in a dangerous country always counts time. In late light, a figure appeared on the horizon to the west, small and crooked at first, then sharper. The figure wobbled in and out of the heat shimmer. For a moment, Clara thought it was her husband, hat tipped, shoulders loose. That careless sway she knew. Then the figure tightened against the light and became a woman whose dress hem was matted with burrs and whose hair carried a strip of calico tied hard to keep it back. The woman reached the wagon, glanced once at Chaska, and went straight to the babies, like a heat-seeking bird. "Calico done," she said, her hand already on the second child's foot to feel warmth, her other hand on Clara's pulse. "You're not dead, which is inconvenient for everyone who likes to pick clean. Breathe when I say." Clara breathed when she said. Calico's hands were fast and firm. She smelled of laudanum and goat soap and dust that had settled on old bread. She glanced at the broken axle, the shade flap, and the neatness of the rawhide. "You've got help," she said, flicking her eyes at Chaska and then back to the babies. "Use it." She pulled a little glass bottle from her bag, looked at Clara's face, and then put the bottle away. "Not for you. Not now. Not unless the shaking gets worse." Clara wanted to ask where Calico came from, and where she was going, and why fate had put 3 strangers around a cracked wagon in a place where even birds flew past with a shudder. She did not ask. She said, "Thank you." Then she said what she had not been planning to say even to herself. "He left. He sold our water." She nodded toward the wagon box. "There's a slip." He signed it. Calico did not look surprised. She had seen too many versions of men. "Men trade the future when the present stares too hard," she said. "What matters now is the next hour. After that, the next. Keep the small hours alive, and the big ones will come ask for you." She swabbed Clara's thighs with water dabbed on a rag. "You'll walk if you don't tear more. You'll rest if you listen. Either way, you'll keep these 2 warm." She felt the second boy's chest, frowned, and rubbed his feet hard with her thumb to bring color in. "You fight," she said to the tiny body. "You hear me?" Dusk deepened like someone bringing down a lid. Chaska tied the horse to a low mesquite with a loop that could be untied quickly if they needed to move faster than they thought. The coyotes gave up pretending to be shy and sat in a semicircle of good manners. Calico tossed them a sun-dried strip of something hard as leather. They fought over it the way men fight over things you cannot eat. Then they settled again in the same tidy order, as if waiting for a sermon. Clara watched a star appear, then another. Chaska looked toward the north and pointed. "Star that does not move," he said. "When you don't know your way, you look there. It remembers for you." He did not touch Clara when he pointed. He pointed with the whole open hand again. A moth battered the rawhide flap once, twice, then found its way to the dimmer air. Night was a blade of cold. All the heat left and took its cruelty with it, but it left behind an empty bed where cruelty had slept, and emptiness can bite too. Chaska pulled his blanket around his shoulders and sat a little away from the wagon where he could see shadows approach from 3 angles. He did not sleep. He sat with his back long and his head angled as if listening to ground sound. Calico slept with her hat over her eyes and her hand on the small bag where the laudanum bottle waited like a bad answer. Clara drifted between shallow dreams and the hard floor of her body. In one shallow dream, she heard gulls and the ocean she had never seen, because pain makes your mind put water where there is none. She woke to coyotes. They were closer. Their eyes were like dropped coals. Then a sound came from the edge of moonlight that was not coyote and not wind. It was boots. The boots came with a voice that already knew it would get what it wanted. "Evening," the voice said. "Hard country for a lady." 3 shapes slid out of the dark. Men on horses, dust still settling behind them, as if the day had been hiding in their clothes. The one in the center had a snakeskin tally whip, coiled like a pet at his thigh. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that meant the opposite of polite. "Lewis Cutter," he said, "looking for strays. Find a bit more than I expected." His eyes cut to the wagon, then the rawhide, then the babies. His smile widened until it was just teeth. Behind him, one of his hands cocked a rifle with a slow, loving motion, the way a boy winds a toy he plans to break. Chaska stood, palms open, his lance grounded, so the point bit the earth and spoke to that, not to men. Clara pushed herself up on her elbows. Pain made light shiver at the edges of her sight. She looked quickly for a face she wanted and did not see. She tasted fear and then swallowed it, because fear would not be food for her sons. "We don't want trouble," she said. "You'll want it even if you don't," Cutter said, light as a feather. "That wagon was pledged to me. So were the contents." A man rode in with a debt and a story, and he left with his pockets lighter and my patience thinner. My patience does not get thin twice. That's policy. He clicked his tongue. His horse stamped like a gentleman impatient for supper. "Get down from there and hand me what's owed," Cutter said. "The bill includes the little ones. They're proof of delivery." Calico slid her hat back and spit in the dust, like punctuation. "Take another step," she said, "and I'll sew your mouth shut the way I do a split heel. Quick but ugly." Cutter laughed, because men like him always laugh when a woman in a battered dress speaks plainly. Then he saw that Calico's hand was easy on the bag that might hold a pistol instead of a bottle. He didn't laugh quite as hard. "No need for temper," he said. "Accounts are just numbers. Once numbers are satisfied, we can all sleep again." Chaska stepped between Cutter and the wagon, not close enough to touch, close enough to be felt. He lifted a palm down to say, "Stand, stay, wait." He looked at Clara, and his look said many things without words. One of the things was that a man can turn his body into a door. Clara moved the babies deeper under the rawhide flap and slid the broken axle with her heel, making it more useful as a club if the world wanted that shape. The man with the rifle drew a bead. He thought no one would notice. Chaska noticed. He said in a voice that carried without shouting, "No." The word stopped the horse's ears more than it stopped the man. Cutter's eyes ran over Chaska's scar, his braid, the shell disc at his throat. His smile softened into something colder. "There's a circular out of Fort Ash with a name that sounds a lot like yours," he said. "Wanted for a misunderstanding with a patrol. I am citizen-minded. I could trade you for the bounty and keep the wagon too. That's a clean ledger." He lifted his chin toward the shadows beyond the wash. "And if your husband snakes back here for his goods, I'll let him apologize all night long. I'm generous that way." The coroner's future inquest would list female unknown blood loss found at Dry Crow Wash, but the undertaker's ledger later tallied 2 wax covers ordered that week. Next, you'll see why the numbers never matched. Morning came with frost on breath and a ring of hoof dents that had a story all their own. Cutter had not taken the twins. He had not left either. He had camped loose in the dark, a cat doing circles before it lay down, because he wanted to see which way the sun would pull the truth. When light bled the stars away, he stood and stretched and smiled again. "The fort's man will be along," he said. "He likes his boots polished and his ledgers neat. He'll make everything legal." He ran the snakeskin whip through his hand. "In the meantime, I'll take one of mine." He reached toward the rawhide flap. Chaska moved, and the lance kissed the ground beside Cutter's boot. The point made a clean, hopeless little sound against a rock. Cutter's smile left for a second, and then he walked back, as if it had just gone to the privy. "You don't want to do that," he said. Chaska did not answer. Calico put herself half in front of Clara, and Clara lifted the axle with both hands, and her arms shook and held anyway. Dust rose in the flat like a low curtain, then parted to show blue coats and a careful row. Lieutenant James Hartwell led them with a face that had learned to be a wall between orders and consequence. His boots were polished enough to reflect whatever he looked at. He reined in, took in the scene with a quick sweep, and then consulted the paper folded near his heart, as if the paper could tell him who deserved breath. "I am here to ensure peace," he said, which is what men like him say when they are about to pick a side and call it the law. His gaze landed on Chaska. The paper landed on Chaska's name like a fly that thought it would live forever. Uneasy refuge is available at the Mission Way Station, Hartwell said. Reverend Pike will give water and order. We will escort you there. The gentleman here, he nodded to Cutter, will state his claim in town, and the court will decide. Cutter smiled in a friendly way that said he had laid planks under that court long ago. I am a humble petitioner, he said, a man of simple account books. Calico rubbed her eye with her knuckle and said nothing, which meant everything. They moved as a ragged column toward the mission. The twins slept and woke and slept again, making fists like seeds. Clara felt milk come hard in her chest and then soften with relief when a small mouth latched and pulled. It hurt in a good way. She rode in the wagon bed while Chaska walked near the wheel, where his shadow could touch the babies' faces when the sun wanted to try them. The mission was a squat building made of the same earth that hated them all. It held a lock on its water barrel, a cross over its door, and a smell of candle smoke inside. Reverend Ezra Pike met them, a book under his arm and a worried mouth under his mustache. He looked at Clara with a kind of hungry pity that made her bristle. He looked at Chaska with a careful angle, as if light made him hard to see. God's house stands open, he said, but God's house is also a hallway to other rooms. I keep records. He lifted the parish register like an offering. Babies born under the eye of the wild ought to be written down, so they do not drift. Clara wanted the boys written, where the world could not pretend it hadn't seen them. Write, she said. Write their names. She chose names that had lived in her mouth since childhood, names her mother had sung to the stove when bread rose quietly. Thomas and Eli. Reverend Pike dipped his pen. The ink dripped like blood without pain. He wrote Thomas Winfield in a hand a teacher would praise. He started to write the father's name, and the pen snagged a fiber of paper and smeared. The smear darkened into a bruise of ink. Pike hesitated. His eyes flicked to Chaska's face, then to Clara's, then to the lieutenant's ledger, then to Cutter's boot tapping a hungry rhythm on the floorboards. Pike pressed the pen too hard. The nib splayed. He closed the book. I will finish the line when the Lord permits, he said softly. Clara heard what he meant and what he feared. Write unknown if you must, she said. Write witness where witness belongs. Hartwell stood outside with his blue coats and read the wanted circular again, in light that did not care. The circular marked Chaska, a mark. It did not mention the seep he had found. It did not mention the 2 little breaths he had rescued from the heat. Paper law is that way. It counts one thing, but not the other. Hartwell's hand shook once, tiny, no more than the tremor a man gets when he lifts his first cup of coffee in the cold. Then he folded the circular and put it away. Town women came with bread and a ring of whispers, because Charity always brings a cousin called Gossip. She lay in the open with him, one said. She had no choice, another said. Choice is a dress rich women wear to church, Calico said, and the women pretended they did not hear. Someone left a small bundle on the step that was meant to look like a gift. It held a cradle charm, a little twig frame wrapped in red thread and sage. The red was the exact shade of Clara's mother's keepsake. It spooked her in a way she could not name. Calico picked it up, sniffed, and dropped it. Men make ghosts when guilt won't let 'em sleep, she said. A woman's hand made that, though. Guilty men have sisters. Late light made the chapel floor glow, the color of old honey. Hartwell cleared his throat. He spoke in the tone of a man who has already decided and needs the words to catch up. The fort expects me to bring in an individual, he said. He did not say prisoner. He did not say bounty. He let the circular slip from his pocket. He looked at Chaska and said, Dawn. Chaska nodded as if he had been asked to help lift a heavy stone. Clara felt heat gather in her cheeks in the cold. She stood because her legs wanted to learn their work again. She took a rifle that leaned near the door, a church gun that had probably not fired in 3 winters. She held it like a promise she was not sure she could keep. No one will take my sons, she said. Her voice surprised even her. It drew a flinch from one of the blue coats and a tick of interest from Cutter. A bell rope in the corner swayed. though no one had touched it, and there was no wind inside. It made a dry kind of tap that sounded like bones in a bag, then boots again. The doorway framed a shadow. Clara knew even in her blood. Silas Winfield stepped in with his hat in his hands, like a man who had found religion an hour ago. He tried to smile and found he could not square his mouth into the shape. "Clara," he said, "I was coming back. Everything got complicated with the team. I secured funds." He said it like he had broken a horse. Lewis Cutter stood half behind him, not hiding, just measuring whether there would be pleasure in stepping forward now or later. Clara stared at the man she had married. He was thinner, or maybe he had always been this thin, and the desert had shaved away her illusions. "You sold our water," she said. Silas flinched like the words were a thrown stone. "Only for a moment. To arrange. I had to square a note so we could move without some men taking the whole wagon. I saved what I could. I'm here now." His eyes skated to the twins, the way eyes skate to coins on a table. Cutter clapped a friendly hand on his shoulder that was a shackle no one had to see. "We're all friends," Cutter said. "Let's settle accounts. The woman and the goods come with me until the note is paid." "That's decent. That's written." Calico's hand slid toward her bag. Hartwell cleared his throat again, the voice of order trying to make itself heard over the voice of money. "The court," he began. Cutter spoke over him. "Paper says what I say it says. Paper lives in my drawer." His grin showed the edge of one-tooth gold, as if he had hammered a coin into his own mouth and kept it there. Night shut with the speed of a door slamming. The mission felt too small for all the bodies and all the fear. Hartwell spoke low to his men, words like "secure perimeter" and "no shots unless fired upon." The men nodded and looked, relieved to have something easy to hold. Chaska sat by the step with his back against the wall and his lance across his knees. He closed his eyes for a breath and then opened them, because some men learn to sleep with eyes that don't forget. Clara stood by the cradle they had carved from a crate. She laid a red thread from her keepsake across the twins' swaddles and tied them in a neat loop. "I promise," she whispered. "I promise to be more than the ground wants me to be." She shook in the night, not from cold, from milk, and from the feeling of a rope around her mind that someone else held. Calico's hand found her wrist and sat there like a weight that meant anchor. "You'll need rest," Calico said. "They will need a mother who can walk." She pulled the laudanum bottle and then pushed it back deep again. "Not that way. No, I've lost more women to the easy cup than to knives." Before dawn, a single horse crossed the flat with a rider leaning forward as if the night had a slope. Grandmother Wichachpi sat in the saddle with no saddle at all, only a folded hide. Her hair was the gray of weathered bone, and her eyes were the color of a winter river. She did not dismount. She looked at Chaska. Then she looked at Clara. She smelled sage from a small pouch at her hip. "Water leaves early when men trouble the river," she said, in a voice that had sand in it and songs. "I dreamed a star shook and then stayed. That means go. That means come back. Both." She pointed at the ridge. "There is the path no soldier sees." Hartwell stepped out with the circular in his hand. Wichapi did not look at him. She looked at the twins and saw everything that mattered. She touched 2 fingers to her own heart and then to the air over the babies' heads. "Hungry ground," she said to Clara, not unkindly. "You made a house on it anyway. That is the name of where I live." She used a word then that Clara did not know, but she understood its weight. It felt like stubborn grace. At first light, Hartwell said the thing he had already said to himself in the dark. "Chaska, you must come with me to the fort. It will be sorted." The sentence had too many rooms to walk through and not enough doors. Chaska stood. He laid the lance across his arms and then handed it to Wichapi, who took it without looking at it, like you take a child's coat at a threshold. Clara felt rage bloom inside her, like a hard flower. "No," she said. "No one takes him for helping me." She lifted the church rifle, and the world held its breath, because old guns and new mothers can make the same kind of mess. Hartwell held up his hand. "Do not," he began. His men shifted, the sound of leather and worry. Cutter smiled and moved a half-step nearer, the rawhide flap where the twins lay. Silas put his hands out and said, "Honey, and in that one word was every smaller word that had ever made Clara feel small. Cutter moved quicker than talk. In the scuffle that followed, a soldier reaching for a barrel, Calico bumping the table so the parish register slid and nearly fell, the bell rope swaying without wind. One of Cutter's men darted like a ferret and lifted a wailing bundle. He was on a horse before anyone cleared the threshold. The horse spun and threw dirt like a curse. Clara's scream cut the morning in half. The man bent low and rode dead south. Cutter laughed once, a bright sound, like breaking something you didn't pay for. Security, he said again. An old word, still works. Under a staged scuffle, a twin was stolen, says the record in the kind of hand that wants to be calm. A woman's scream split the cold. The sheriff's deposition in Dead Mule Crossing contains one crossed-out line. Silas W. transferred his wife's wagon and person. The word person scraped into a bruise. Next, you'll see who made him write it. Chaska did not wait for Hartwell to decide. He was already moving, already reading the sand, the way a priest reads a psalm. He ran lightly, as if his feet did not wish to leave a full story behind them. Wichapi handed him back the lance with a nod that was a blessing and a warning. Calico stuffed a packet of dried meat into Clara's palm and then shoved her onto the wagon bench. "You're not sitting," she said. "You're coming. If you die, those boys die." Hartwell cursed, the way a man curses when he calls it prayer. He split his troop because his orders fought his eyes. Half would go with the prisoner he did not take. Half would follow a kidnapper he had not stopped. He felt the ledger in his coat pull at him like a hook. He ran anyway. They rode into a Badlands gauntlet, where the walls of the world closed to a throat. Cloud shouldered up over the mesa, with the lazy roll of something that did not need to hurry to ruin you. Wichapi appeared on the rim, more than once, where no horse should have found a perch. She did not shout. She pointed. Her hand drew lines in the air that were safer than the lines Cutter had drawn on paper. They threaded through prickly pear and past a petroglyph of a man and a deer whose nose touched, left by hands who had died before anyone in this story was born. The air smelled like the moment before a match is struck. They reached Dead Mule Crossing, which was not a name someone had chosen to be mean, and had simply reported the truth. There lay a mule's bones, half buried in the sand, a bleached piece of jaw that looked like a grin with no joy in it. Lewis Cutter stood on the far side with a baby tucked in the crook of his arm, like a roll of banknotes, and his snakeskin whip, slack as a smile. Silas Winfield hovered near him, with a face that kept trying to be brave and kept finding a wall in the way. Chaska walked forward with his hands slightly away from his body, all his weapons on the outside where men could see them. Hartwell raised a hand to hold his men and to hide his own shaking. "Bring him," Cutter said, tipping his chin at Chaska, like you tip a jar to see if anything is left in it. "Bring him, and she can have the bundle." He bounced the baby once, too hard, as if to prove the baby had spring. Clara made a sound that had no word in it. Calico's bag shifted. Wichapi watched from the rim without a blink. The cloud above the mesa fattened. A breeze went across their faces like a hand, ready to be a fist. The first drop of rain hit the baby's blanket and made no mark because it dried the instant it landed. The second left a small coin of a darker color. Then the sky split the mesa with a crack, and the sound rolled after like wagons, with no wheels. Somewhere upstream, a wall of held-back water lost patience. The air changed the way a person changes the second before they decide to say the thing that breaks a family. "Flood," Wichapi said to no one and to everyone. She pointed at the bend where calm water would not be calm in 10 breaths. Hartwell saw it 1 second later and felt the shape of a choice press into his ribs. Cutter laughed at the warning and looked down to see what the river thought of laughter. It thought the same thing of him that the desert thought of everyone. He did not understand time the way water understands it. Silas did, or maybe he did not understand, but his body remembered a smaller, better man and moved the way that man would have. He waded into the black surge when it came, knee-deep, then hip, his mouth open in a cry that water took for a drink. He held his hands out to push the baby toward Chaska. Cutter fired a pistol. The shot was a crack no one would remember first, because the flood had all the lines today. The undertaker's ledger for that week shows 2 wax covers ordered, but only 1 burial paid in full. Next, you'll see whose name the ledger keeper dared to write in pencil. Water rose like a black wall and took the shape of the canyon. It moved with a mind of its own, hissing over rock and chewing sage to rags. Silas lunged into it, and the river gave him a shove that said he was a fool, and maybe a brave one too. The baby bawled once and choked on spray. Chaska was already moving, already knee-deep, bracing 1 foot on a rock that tried to slide out from under him. He locked his knee and leaned into the current, until the water had to choose who it wanted more. Silas pushed the bundle with both hands, fingers white on wet cloth, and Chaska grabbed the blanket's fringe with 3 fingers, and then with his whole palm. The river tried to snatch the baby back and got Chaska's forearm instead. His scar flashed pale under brown water. He pulled harder. The blanket came free like a tooth. He turned, planted, and shoved the child toward Calico, who had waded into her thighs, cursing God by his first name. Cutter fired again. The shot went wild, because the flood slapped his wrist, the way a mother slaps a hand from a cookie jar. He yelled a string of words the river didn't care about. His horse reared, smelled fear in its own breath, and stumbled backward into a hole the water had been saving. Cutter went over the saddle and vanished with a sound like a gulp. The horse fought, broke free, and swam without him, eyes rolling white. Silas tried to turn back toward shore. The current spun him and pinned him against a snag of mesquite roots. He clung. He lifted his head long enough to spit out water and say a name that could have been Clara, or could have been the boy he had been when he still thought he could keep promises. Then the root tore loose. He slid past, arms windmilling, mouth open. Hartwell, boots full of mud, flung himself forward and missed by half an arm. The current took Silas around the bend where the canyon belly narrowed, and the water ran faster, as if eager to digest something it had been sent. Clara heard herself scream, and did not know what words rode in the scream. The saved twin sobbed in Calico's arms, eyes squeezed shut, face red as a boiled apple. Clara staggered, nearly fell, then caught herself on the wagon splinter of drift that the river tossed to her like a dare. Wichapi kneeled at the edge of the wash and pressed her palms flat. Her lips moved, maybe a prayer, maybe a count. The storm leaned over the mesa and let loose the second line of its song. Rain spread like beads snapped from a wire. Chaska hauled himself out, water pouring from his leggings, chest heaving. He shoved hair back from his face and scanned the foam and drift for the flash of a hat or a hand. He saw nothing that belonged to a man. Only the things men leave behind when they are finished. A boot, a sack, a tin plate that spun and then settled in an eddy, as if satisfied to be still. Hartwell's men formed a line without orders, ready to catch what the flood belched. The flood belched a dead branch, a coil of rope, a barrel that had seen better whiskey. No Silas, no Cutter. For a breath, there was only rain on rock, and infant breath fought for between sobs. Then the river's voice lowered. The wall became a shoulder, and then a heavy back dragging its weight away toward lower ground, where other men could blame other floods for their misfortunes. The canyon exhaled. The air tasted like tin and fresh mud. Calico put the baby into Clara's arms and touched Clara's cheek with the backs of her fingers, as if testing bread in an oven. "He's here," she said. "Hold him so he knows where his world is." Clara held him. Her whole body shook. She could not feel her legs below the knee for a moment, and then she could feel everything again. Too much, and all at once. She kissed the damp, dark hair stuck to his skull, and felt a fierce, clean anger take root. It had nothing to do with revenge. It had everything to do with not letting men with papers decide which babies got to grow teeth. Hartwell found a patch of higher ground, and tried to make order stand on it. He sent 2 troopers, downstream with poles to hook anything that might be a man. He sent one back to the mission, with a message written tight and neat. He looked at Chaska, and at the lance across Chaska's knees, and at the way Wichapi watched him. He folded the wanted circular and put it away again. The paper made a quiet crack, as if breaking inside his coat. "We'll search the bend," he said. He did not say for which body. He did not have to. They found bodies, but not the ones they wanted. A drowned coyote, with its mouth still open in a joke it never finished. A mule spine that had been there a year, washed clean enough to play. Cutter did not float up where they could see him. Silas did not come back yet. The river was not finished with either man. They made camp on the rim, where the flood could be seen, making promises to the desert it would not keep. The sky cleared with the suddenness of a child's mood. Stars burned as if nothing in the world had changed. Clara fed both twins until her shoulders ached and her eyelids pulled like iron filings. Calico brewed coffee that tasted like boiled boot and handed a cup to Hartwell without asking if he liked it. He drank. He looked 10 years older in the light of a low fire. "You were right," he said to no one, which is the closest a man like him will come to saying "I was wrong." Wichapi squatted near Chaska and said something low. He answered lower. She touched his scar, and then the ground, and then her own chest. "They will say you crossed lines," she said in English for Clara's sake. "They will say you made a house under a shadow, not yours." She looked at Clara. "Lines are the ways men keep count. Water knows no lines. Babies either." She gave a little snort that might have been a laugh buried under decades of careful. "Hungry ground likes brave fools. It likes brave mothers more." At dawn, the flood had thinned to a stubborn run. The canyon's throat showed teeth. The 2 troopers who had gone downstream returned with a crude stretcher and faces arranged not to frighten anyone, which meant they brought something that would frighten anyone. The bundle they set down was heavy and light at once. The weight of meat and the lightness of a story finished. Calico opened the oiled cloth. The face was blunted by water, lips peeled back from teeth that had bitten apples and lies. A torn ear, a scar over the right eyebrow. Silas. Clara made no sound this time. The sound had been used up in the night. She closed her eyes. Then she opened them, because someone had to look for her boy's sake, and there was no one else to do the looking. Hartwell removed his hat. "I'll record him as unknown until—" he began, and Calico's look stopped him. "No," Clara said. Her voice was steady. "Write his name. Write what you saw. Write where the river gave him back." Wichapi nodded once. "Small," Hartwell wrote. His hand did not shake now. "Men can learn to write truth when it won't let them sleep otherwise." They wrapped the body again. The ground was too hard for a shovel and too soft for a fire. They sent a rider to town for the undertaker to come with his wagon and his oilcloth and his ledger. 2 wax covers this week, the man would say later, licking the pencil point before he labeled a line. 2, and his mouth would purse like a question, even after the answer sat beside him under canvas. The coroner from Dry Crow would put down, "Mail, water damage, unclaimed," because paperwork runs slower than love and faster than grief. He would cross unclaimed out later, in a hand that looked ashamed of itself. There was no sign of Cutter. Hartwell sent 2 scouts up the opposite bank. They found a shot horse and a slick patch where a man had crawled. They found a trail that bled into rock, and then into nothing. Men like Cutter were good at turning into nothing when they needed to. Nothing made room for them the way it does for snakes and rumors. The mission took them back, like a house takes in a storm. Reverend Pike opened the parish register and smoothed the smear with 2 fingers. He had a look on his face men wear when they are about to do something that will cost them friends. He dipped the pen. He wrote, "Father unknown." He hesitated. Then he added, "Guardian, Chaska, witness," in a careful hand, as if each letter might be read by the Lord himself. He signed his name under it twice, one time for courage and one time for fear. He looked at Clara and then away. "I will catch trouble for this," he said. "Let it come to my door first." Calico heated water and made Clara drink spoonfuls of broth until Clara swore she could taste tin spoons in her sleep. The twins softened into a routine that felt like a song with too many verses but a good chorus. They woke and drank and slept and woke. They had fists and hiccups and sighs, and a smell that could break a heart. Chaska carved a cradle board from a spare plank and wrapped it with a strap cut from his own saddle thong. He decorated the edge with a small star gouged in with his knife, a mark he had learned from a winter count. He did not say why he chose that mark. He did not have to. Wichapi saw it and made a sound in her throat like a soft drum. Rumor worked faster than riders. Women who had been kind the first day now delayed in doorways to watch. Some brought boiled milk and could not meet Clara's eye. Some brought their eyes and nothing else. A boy threw a pebble and missed and ran. A man spat the word Sioux as if it were a cuss that tasted of iron. Calico met his eye until his spit dried in his mouth. Hartwell made a show of posting 2 men by the mission door. He did not say if they were there to keep people out or keep someone in. One afternoon, when heat stacked up outside like furniture piled against a door, a courier from Fort Ashe arrived with a sealed envelope and a face that had been trained not to mean anything. Hartwell broke the seal and read without moving his eyes. The paper said words like political sensitivity and avoid escalation and deliver named party to the fort without incident. The paper did not say what to do with twins, or with women who had bled for life, or with the kind of courage that sits quiet and holds babies while men argue. Hartwell folded the letter into a square so sharp it could have cut a man and put it in his coat. He walked out into the light and spoke to Clara, to Chaska, to Calico, to Pike. Orders are to bring him, he said gently. Orders do not see what I see, but orders are louder than I am. Wichapi stood in the door behind him. You can carry orders like water in a sieve, she said. You will still be wet and thirsty. She looked at Chaska. Come at dusk, she said to him. Come alone to the ridge. Bring only your shadow. She looked at Hartwell. It is a long way around a short truth. Clara held both boys and said, I will not let you take him. He saved my sons. Hartwell took off his hat again and stared into the parting where his hair had learned discipline long ago. I know, he said. The word sounded like a bruise. I know, and I don't know. That is where I live. He looked toward town, where Cutter's money moved under tables. If I take him, Cutter's kind will praise me. If I don't, they will aim me. If I do nothing, they will do something worse. He swallowed. I will go to the ridge at dusk and hear what the old woman says. It was not an order. It was a man asking the desert to allow a different shape of day. Dusk found them high, where the Badlands turned into teeth that had gnawed at the sky for centuries and made no mark on it. Wichapi stood with her arms folded, small as a thorn and as certain as one. She spoke in Lakota and in English, weaving the two the way a woman weaves 2 colors when she has barely enough thread to make a blanket. There is a trail no soldier sees, she said again. If a man takes it at night, he walks on stars and not on dirt. If a man takes it in pride, he walks off a cliff. If a man takes it for a woman and 2 children, he walks past a hand that would have pulled him down. She looked at Hartwell with a stare that weighed him as surely as a butcher weighs meat. You can close your eyes and say you were confused by rocks. The rocks will not write a letter to your superiors. They do not speak your language. Hartwell breathed out, slow. He could feel the weight of each stripe on his sleeve like a hand on his arm. He could feel, too, the heat of a night when he had been 19 and had watched a town burn for lack of a word spoken at the right time. He had lived with that ash in his throat for a decade. He stepped back. I never saw him, he said to the failing sun. I never saw him, and I don't know which way stars go. The sentence felt like a plank laid over a crossing that was too wide. It held anyway. Chaska touched his brow to Wichapi's hand. Mother of my mother, he said softly, I will not bring trouble to your door. She snorted a laugh. This place is trouble's door, she said. Bring something kinder. She put a small pouch in his palm. Sage, she said, for the babies, and for the place where paper lives. They made it look like a misunderstanding, the kind that grows out of dust and dissolves in it. Chaska walked away from the mission in full view, down the main track, then slipped into a draw that led nowhere official. Wichapi took the high path only old feet dared. Hartwell sat in the mission yard and wrote a report that a future reader would call confused. The subject departed prior to escort, he wrote. The dust obscured vision. He left out the part where his eyes had been as clear as mountain glass. He did not lie about the dust. Dust was everywhere. Dust covers law in a very even layer. He signed his name in ink that did not tremble. Night swelled. The mission's candle made a small sun behind the window. Clara held Thomas and Eli and watched the door until watching made her stomach sick. Calico sat by the hearth and mended a tear in her skirt with stitches small and mean. Men always think they're the story, she said without looking up. They don't understand that the story eats men and keeps walking. She tied off the thread with her teeth and spit the end into the fire. We'll go to town in the morning, she said. You'll need to stand in the mercantile and let every woman see you're not ashamed. Shame is a coat they hand us. You don't have to wear it. Morning came with the undertaker's wagon creaking like an old man's joints. Mr. Pritchard had a face too smooth for the work he did, and hands too soft. He liked to say he was a professional. He liked that word. He wrote 2 wax covers in his ledger. With a pencil, he licked twice for luck. He took Silas on the cart and measured him with a tailor's tape, as if that might make the box fit better in the ground. He glanced at Clara, and then away. I can offer a service, he said, at a discount for widows. Clara looked at him until he coughed. No service, she said, just the ground. He made his services where I could not use them. The coroner arrived after, late and irritable, hat askew, pen jammed behind his ear. He filled a form with boxes and lines. He checked mail. He checked unknown, because the form liked that word, and he had not yet learned to dislike it. Reverend Pike stood beside him and said, Write his name. The coroner frowned and tapped the pen against his teeth. Verification, he said. Procedure. Pike tapped the parish register. Write what you know. The coroner wrote, Silas Winfield, in a small hand, and then drew a line through unknown, as if erasing himself, one layer at a time. Cutter's men stopped coming by the mission as often. Word had it their boss had crawled out of the river a mile down, coughing up weeds and rage, and had taken a room above the saloon to dry out like a mean fish. Word had it he had tied a fresh leather thong tight around his wrist to remind himself that something had been taken from him without payment. Men who lived by account books kept tallies in their flesh when ink ran out. His right hand had a raw groove now, a promise he liked to touch until it bled. He sent a message, not by letter, but by a broken shutter in the mission kitchen, and by a barrel rolled against the door at night, as if by the wind. You owe me, the wind said. Bring what's mine. Calico found the barrel pushed to the door at dawn, and boot prints that went in a circle as if a man had been trying to decide whether to break in or to knock like a gentleman. She showed Hartwell. He scraped the heel of his hand over his jaw, thought a long time, and then swore softly. He doubled the watch and pretended the fort had ordered it. The fort had done no such thing. The fort slept and dreamed of paydays, and did not think of twins who smelled like milk. Clara took the boys into town that day anyway. Calico went beside her, and Wichapi followed with her shadow, and nothing else. They walked the main street with their chins level. Men stood by barrels and pretended to spit. Women pretended to be interested in cloth bolts. Children stared with the frank cruelty of the untrained. Clara went into the mercantile and bought pins and thread and a tin of syrup, because sweetness was medicine you could pour. She laid coins one by one on the counter, so the sound of them would be a hymn. Mr. Smalls counted them twice and gave her 2 back she had not expected. He glanced at Wichapi and pretended he hadn't. Ma'am, he said, meaning it. Outside, a hand caught Clara's sleeve. She turned. Silas's sister stood there with eyes like Silas's when he used to tell a truth. He was a fool, the sister said. He was also my brother. She pressed a small cloth pack into Clara's palm. His mother's ring, she said. He pawned it. I took it back. Clara closed her fingers around the metal and felt the shape of old promises cool there. Not burning, not comforting either. Thank you, she said. The sister nodded once and walked away, back straight, mouth set. Women know how to carry what cannot be set down. When dusk fell that evening, the mission bell did not ring. It swung once and then stopped. The rope lay in a soft S on the floor as if it had changed its mind. Hartwell's men paced, looking at shadows the way you look at beds you know a snake is under. The door banged open so hard, the latch bounced. Cutter stood there, hair dried into a kind of halo an evil saint might wear, eyes light with a fever that did not need a thermometer. He had a bandage under his hat brim and a pistol under his hand, tucked in like a sleeping animal. 2 men flanked him, wide as doorways. He found Clara in the room, without searching. "You owe me," he said brightly. "My accounts are not settled. You think a flood pays debt? Floods don't sign their names." Calico stepped once, and Cutter's hand flicked toward the pistol. Hartwell was behind him in a breath, but not close enough to change what would happen if a finger moved. Wichapi did not move at all. She had become the exact size of her shadow. She breathed and let the room come to that breath. "You tried to drown a baby," Clara said, and her voice had no tremor. "You called him security. I call him my boy." Cutter smiled the way a wolf smiles when imagining what it will do next week. "Words," he said. "Security. Boy, flood, law. I have a piece of paper says you were pledged. The wagon pledged. The contents pledged. All neat. The sheriff's deposition in Dead Mule Crossing contains 1 crossed out line. Silas W. transferred his wife's wagon and person." The word person scraped into a bruise. "Next you'll see who made him write it." Cutter took a step. Hartwell lifted a hand, but Cutter had been waiting for that hand and wanted to see how fast it moved. A shot cracked. The room's air jumped. For a fraction of a second, the world went smaller, smaller, into the hole the bullet made through it. Then everything came back, but moved different. Cutter looked surprised, and then furious. He stared at his own right hand, as if it had betrayed him. Blood ran from the web between thumb and forefinger. Not a flood, just a steady accounting. Calico's bag held a pistol after all. Smoke curled from its mouth like a little ghost, leaving a good party. "Next shot is your knee," she said. "After that, something you'll miss more." Hartwell's men surged past him and pinned Cutter to the wall so hard, dust fell from the beams. The 2 flanking men went for their guns and met soldiers instead. It was loud for a moment and then very quiet. Cutter panted. "A dog with a short leash. Assault," he said. "Armed robbery." He said the words like spells. "You can say sky," Calico said. "It doesn't make rain. Get out of my doorway." Hartwell snapped irons on Cutter's wrists, and for once, they looked like more than jewelry. He marched him into the yard and into the dark where men who thought they owned towns sometimes find out they don't when light is off. Hartwell wrote another report that night. He did not know who would read it. He wrote anyway. "Local citizen Lewis Cutter wounded during attempted seizure of infant," he wrote. "Infant recovered unharmed. Female Clara Winfield, and infants placed under temporary protection. Subject, Chaska, not present." He let the ink dry and then blew on it, as if that would set the words harder than law could. Clara sat by the cradle and watched Thomas breathe. Eli slept with his mouth open, dreaming the way only a second-born baby dreams after a flood, as if the world had already tried to take him and failed, and he could rest a little deeper for that failure. She took the ring from Silas's sister's bundle and looped the red thread through it twice and tied it to the cradle's edge. It shone dull in the candlelight, neither proud nor ashamed. She wanted to hate it. She wanted to love it. She settled for letting it be a piece of metal in a world of flesh and mud. Near midnight, Wichapi placed the small sage pouch on the register. Pike started to protest, caught himself and bowed his head. "Keep it," she said. "Paper gets sick sometimes. Give it medicine." He smiled, despite himself. "I will," he said. He tucked the pouch into the book's gutter, where the spine had a scar, like a healed mouth. Toward dawn, hoofbeats came, slow, not sneaking. A trooper returned from the lower bend with his hat in his hands. He would not meet Clara's eyes. He spoke to Hartwell. "We found one," he said. "Face marred, clothes, gents' quality. Snakeskin whip tangled in drift 3 yards away." Hartwell closed his eyes. He opened them. "Write him," he said. "Write him so he can't walk around in people's mouths forever, like a ghost. We will not honor him. We will finish him." Mr. Pritchard's ledger would carry a new line that week. He would lick the pencil and write, "Wax cover, 1." He would feel the urge to write the name in ink, and would not, choosing pencil instead in case a man with money asked questions later. He would think himself prudent. He would not sleep, though, because prudence sits poorly on a chest that hears truth knocking. Before the sun broke, Reverend Pike dipped his pen again. His hand did not shake this time. He drew a careful line under the God-smudged entry and wrote, "Amended by witness after flood, father unknown, guardian, Chaska." He signed with the little flourish he allowed himself when he thought God might like a bit of beauty in the ledger of pain. He pressed sand on the ink to set it. He closed the book with a gentle slap. "If anyone asks," he said, "I will show them this page before any other." Clara slept for the first time in a bed that did not sway or creak. She dreamed of the North Star steady as a nail in heaven's board. She woke to the smell of coffee and sage and milk. For a moment she did not know whose life she was wearing. Then Thomas hiccuped, and Eli yawned, and the coat fit again, stiff but warming. In the next days, Cutter's friends tried to make knives from words. They told anyone who would listen that Clara was a liar, that Chaska was a kidnapper, that Hartwell had lost his way. They offered money for the twins, as if children were strays that could be penned up and branded. Calico laughed in men's faces more than once that week. Wichapi stood silent where laughter would have broken something fragile. Hartwell did his best impression of a wall. He found he was better at it than he had thought. Afternoon, a woman with a jaw like an axe blade came up the mission path and stopped 2 feet from Clara. "I said your name wrong the other day," she said. "I said it with pity in my mouth. I'll say it again with my own name next to it." She gave her name. She gave it like a handshake. "If anyone comes for you at night," she said, "I will light a lamp." She looked at the twins. "You feed them, and you sleep when they sleep, and you don't listen to men who explain the world. They don't know it. They never do." She turned and walked away. 2 other lamps lit in windows up the street before the hour ended. Sometimes a village remembers itself in a single morning. Hartwell came in at dusk, with a paper folded small. "Cutter is dead," he said. "Washed up against a snag like a bad idea. The coroner wrote him. The undertaker wrapped him. No service." He put the paper on the table and looked at the cradle. "I sent the report to the fort. I told them the subject departed under dust. I told them the mother and children will move east, with the next wagon train under my protection. If they order otherwise, the mail will be slow. I will not read it until you are gone." Clara watched his face as he spoke, and saw the man he could have become if he had not chosen boots and ledgers. She nodded to him. "Thank you," she said. He shrugged, embarrassed. "I am only late," he said. "I should have chosen sooner." That night, the candle burned low and made the room look like it had edges it did not have in daylight. Clara sat alone for a stretch, the twins finally sleeping with their mouths turned down in peaceful disapproval of the world. She touched the red thread tied at the cradle's edge. It felt alive. The wind made the bell rope stir once and then be still again. She spoke into the quiet, not sure to whom. "I will not be ashamed," she said. "I will not let paper right me wrong. I will not raise sons who flinch first." The words were plain as bread. They tasted like iron in her mouth and sweetness in her throat. The undertaker's ledger for that week shows 2 wax covers ordered, but only 1 burial paid in full. Next, you'll see whose name the ledger keeper dared to write in pencil, and why a pencil line can send a man's house into collapse, even after his body is gone. Morning rose thin and pale, as if the sky had been washed too many times. The mission yard held the marks of a rough week, boot scuffs, a cracked bucket, a trace of blood that rain had not found. Inside, the twins fed like clock hands moving, slow, sure, busy with the work of staying. Clara looked older around the eyes and younger around the mouth. There is a kind of softness that comes when a woman knows what she will not give up. Word from town came on a breath, and then another. Cutter's body lay in the undertaker's back room, wrapped in oiled canvas, as neat as a parcel a man might send to himself. Mr. Pritchard had penciled a name on his ledger line, Louis Cutter, then looked at the letters until they stung, as if the graphite might turn to ink if stared at long enough. The coroner wrote, "Accidental drowning pending eyewitness accounts," and the sheriff dabbed his seal on the deposition he had avoided finishing the day before. The sheriff's hand went tight when he reached the line about Silas's deal. It is not easy to write down what a man you knew did when no one watched. He had written, "transferred wife's wagon and person," once, and then scraped at the word person until the page bruised. Now he wrote it again beside the bruise. A second hand, Mr. Smalls from the Mercantile, called as witness, pressed his name below the line. Papers don't cry. They swell when wet and tear if you're not careful. The sheriff wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist and said he had dust in them. Hartwell rode into town with 2 men, not to throw weight, but to keep it from falling on the wrong side of the beam. He walked straight to the sheriff's office, hat in hand this time, without thinking about appearances. "Finish the thing," he said, nodding at the deposition. "We'll carry a copy." The sheriff slid the paper across and let Hartwell see the scraped word and the rewritten one. "I let that line rot yesterday," the sheriff said. "My sister would say that makes me a man who doesn't know which way a stove door opens. I'm fixing it." Hartwell folded the copy and put it into his inner pocket with the care a man reserves for a letter from home. He did not plan to send it anywhere. He planned to keep it where his hand could find it when conscience went hungry. Clara wrapped the boys and walked out into the square with Calico and Wichapi, flanking her like 2 ideas too strong to ignore. People looked and then tried not to. She went to Mr. Smalls and bought a tin of cornbread and 2 sticks of candy and a small square of blue cloth she did not need, just because it felt good to choose something that had nothing to do with weather or men. On the way out, a woman who had never looked at her before stepped across and said, "My name is June." She did not say more. She pressed a small paper between Clara's fingers, a prayer torn from a booklet, and kept walking. On the paper, the printed ink had spread a little, the way ink does when it meets a thumb that sweated while deciding. Calico angled her body so she could see down 2 streets with one glance. "They'll try at the hearing," she said. "If a man drowns, and he owned half the judges, justice gets a cough. It will want soup." Wichapi snorted. "Men make rooms where their voices sound big," she said. "Then they call the room truth. We will stand outside the room and make the truth bigger." The hearing sat in the saloon's back room because it had chairs and a table and a door that closed. Beer smell clung to the walls like old vows. Reverend Pike stood with his register under his arm, hat off, hair mussed, like a man who had argued with himself all morning. Mr. Pritchard, undertaker, had his ledger and a pinched look, as if he feared numbers might bite. The coroner had his form and a pen he loved too much. The sheriff had his scraped paper and the jaw of a man who had decided to keep it. Hartwell stood by the window, where he could count who crossed the alley. He didn't like surprises anymore. They called Clara first. She spoke plain. She said what Silas had done, and what he had meant to do, and what the river had taken as payment for someone else's debt. She did not speak long. Truth shortens the tongue. One of Cutter's friends tried to ask if she had encouraged her husband's leaving by nagging or by failing to be soft enough. Calico coughed so loud the man lost his place. The room changed temperature. Clara said, "I gave him bread and a chance. He traded both for water money." The man sat down, because a simple sentence with a spine can make a room suddenly full of furniture with corners. They called Pike. He opened the register to the page with the smear. He laid the sage pouch in the gutter, where the book cracked and no longer hurt. He read, voice steady. Thomas and Eli Winfield, baptized under necessity. Father unknown. Guardian, Chaska. The friend of Cutter lifted his eyebrows like a slim knife. "Guardian?" he said, tasting the word. "A heathen?" Pike kept his eyes on the page. "A man," he said, "who held a child in floodwater and did not let go." He turned the book so the room could see. Handwriting has backbone when it knows itself. The room read the spine of those letters. They called Mr. Pritchard. He tried to make numbers polite. "2 wax covers this week," he said. "Only 1 burial paid in full." He swallowed. "I expect funds from Cutter's estate once it is, arranged." Hartwell looked at him until Pritchard's collar itched. "Write that final line now." Hartwell said. Pritchard raised his pencil and wrote, Lewis Cutter, in cautious gray. He stared at it. He looked at the inkwell. He did not reach for ink. Pike tapped the desk with one finger. Ink, he said. Voice mild. Pritchard dipped. The letters darkened, settled, and bit the page a little. Pencil is a rehearsal. Ink is marriage. Men in the room shifted like something had just been decided by the paper, and not by them. They called the coroner. He read his form, and then scratched out unknown, with neat, ashamed lines. Silas Winfield, he wrote again, then added, identified by spouse and Reverend Pike, place of recovery, Dry Crow Wash. He initialed the change. The sound was small. It added a stone to a wall that had been wobbly. The sheriff laid the deposition on the table and kept a finger on the scraped word, as if it might try to run. He read the parts that hurt and the parts that mean men put on to feel taller. He looked at Clara only once. He ran his thumb along the bruise in the paper. I let a word be smaller than it was, he said. I don't plan to feel that way twice. He signed again under his own name. The second signature was cleaner than the first. Sometimes a man gets better at himself in a single afternoon. Outside, boots thudded on the boardwalk. The door opened without a knock. A man with a face like dried leather and eyes that looked at numbers before they looked at people stepped in. Cutter's lawyer. They never look like wolves. They look like clocks. He set a fat folder on the table and smiled, the way a clock smiles, by keeping time. My client is unavailable, he said, owing to unfortunate weather. His estate has concerns. The woman pledged still owes. The vow does not dissolve in water. Calico leaned back in her chair until it squeaked and said, You can marry your vows if you like. The rest of us will live. Wichapi did not speak. She watched the lawyer's hands. He kept them folded as if praying to paper. Hartwell stepped forward. He took the sheriff's deposition and placed it on top of the folder, like a flat rock set on a snake. The vow was made under duress, he said. The good sheriff neglected to make the arrest sooner. We are done neglecting. He nodded to the sheriff. The sheriff nodded back and found it easier than he thought. He stamped the deposition with a fresh seal. The seal sank a new ring into the bruise. The room exhaled. The lawyer counted the men in the room and the way their shoulders sat. He smiled again, thinner. He closed his folder. We will pursue relief in territorial court, he said. We may appeal to the fort. Hartwell almost smiled. Do, he said. Tell them to write me. I like letters. I will file it beside one that says the subject departed under dust. They ended the hearing with no hymn, only the sound of chairs pushed back and boots finding ground. Outside, the square felt wider. Clouds worked like laundry on the line. A wind came through that smelled like grass, that might try to push up again if given a month without hoofprints. Calico blew out her breath and tilted her hat back. You did well, she told Clara. Some days doing well looks like not crying till you're alone. Some days it looks like buying candy. She flicked the wrapped sticks in the pocket of Clara's apron. Save those for the hour when one boy screams and the other thinks he might join him. Hartwell walked them back to the mission. He was quiet in the way men are when the thing they have done sits in them and looks around. At the door, he paused. When the wagon train comes through next week, I'll ride you to the pass, he said. After that, traders will carry word you went east. The fort will let the dust lie. He hesitated. There is another road. He glanced at Wichapi. There is always another road if a man will say he didn't see it. Wichapi, let the smallest smile show. A thin crescent. The road thanks you for your blindness, she said. It got a free day. That evening, Clara took the ring from the cradle edge and threaded it through the red strand again, then tied it to a small lock of her own hair and tucked the braid into a crack in the chapel's stone near the door. For what was good, she whispered. For what was not. She traced the stone with her fingertip, like a letter she was too tired to finish. Pike watched from the shadow and said nothing. Later he put a finger to the stone and left it there until the skin warmed. On the last morning before the train, Chaska stood on the ridge above the wash, which had gone back to being a gray gash where sun collected. He did not come down among the buildings. He did not need to make a scene of parting. Wichapi climbed to him in straight lines as if she had far to go and expected her legs to be honest about it. They spoke long without words. He pressed his forehead to hers briefly. He took the small cradle board with the star he had carved and set it where the path bent, a place Clara would see when she looked up, with both boys blowing bubbles at the same time and needing 2 hands. He wrapped a tiny scrap of blue cloth around the top strap, a piece Clara would know at once, because she had chosen it herself. A man can leave truth where it will be found, without knocking on the door, to hand it over, like a debt. Clara saw the board when the wagon train rolled slow, as a prayer, around the bend. She pressed it to her chest, and felt the edge of the carved star and the smoothness of the strap. She tied the board across her back and set Thomas against it while Eli nursed, and then they swapped, because fairness is a habit best learned early. Hartwell rode on the outside of the train, like a shepherd who hopes wolves will be lazy for a day. Pike walked beside the lead wagon a mile or two, and then stopped, breath short, but heart sure. He raised the register in a half salute. "If anyone asks," he called, "I will tell them to read the amended line first." Calico climbed into the third wagon and yelled back over her shoulder, "If any woman asks how to get laudanum, I'll lie to her. If any man asks, I'll sell him the bottle." She laughed at her own joke, and then wiped her eyes with her sleeve. They made the pass by noon. The world opened to hills that remembered rain longer. Grass lay like a nap, whether animals had slept there or not. The wagon master lifted his hat and scratched his head and considered whether to stop early or push to the creek. He chose the creek because men think they are choosing even when water is doing the choosing. Clara rode the creek's song like a woman who has learned to hear luck from 30 yards. She laid the cradle board on a rock and let both boys kick their legs in sun while she washed their feet and her own wrists. She did not cry. She did not have to, today. That night by the fire, a trader from Far East told a story about a town where a judge lost his bench because a line in a ledger had been written to please a rich man, and someone found the pencil under the ink, and the pencil was a witness no one had expected. He laughed when he told it. He did not know he was talking to the woman whose life had been measured in such lines all month. Clara smiled into the fire and fed it one more stick, and thought of Mr. Pritchard, licking his pencil and reaching for ink, and of the sheriff's finger resting heavy on the scraped bruise. She thought of the sage in the parish register, a medicine tucked where paper remembers sin. She thought of Cutter's lawyer folding his folder thinner, and of Hartwell writing a letter he would never send. She thought of the winter sky and a star that did not move, the star Chaska had taught her to trust. She rocked both boys and whispered the names of the things that had tried to kill them and had failed. Heat, dust, men, words. Days later, enough days to let the desert's voice fade into a hum behind her teeth. The train cut east and south. A storm walked the horizon like a tired giant. Clara felt the weight in her chest that meant milk, and the weight in her heart that meant home was not a place she could point to yet. Calico rode up and pointed with her chin. "See that notch?" she said. "Pass leads to a little town that won't care where you've been, as long as you can pay and mind your own business. Men are mean there the way men are mean everywhere, but some of the women have lamps. I know 2 of their names. I'll write them on your hand." She took Clara's hand and wrote June and Ruth in small letters with a stump of pencil. "Show them this. They'll make room." At a camp 2 days beyond that, a painted robe hung from a willow limb to dry. A trader had it for sale and stood on a stump to show its pictures. On the lower left of the robe, a tiny star had been painted above little lines that could be a river. The trader said, "This mark means a year the river was strange. Who knows which year? They mark like that when winter is cold, or when leaders die, or when buffalo won't be fooled." Clara stood under the willow and did not touch the robe. She felt the shape of the carved star at her back, where Thomas slept. Her mouth tasted like sage for a moment, though she had not burned any. She thanked the trader and walked on. They came to a crossroads where 2 traders split, one toward the railroad and one toward a town, with a name Clara forgot as soon as she heard it. She chose the rails. Wichapi had spoken of stars and lines and not of iron, But Clara had learned to read many languages in one season. Iron would take them faster than men with old claims could run. The train breathed like an animal as it pulled in, a black chest rising and falling. The boys looked solemn at the whistle and then sneezed, which broke laughter out of Clara like a secret door. Calico hugged her hard. "If you find a midwife, where you land, tell her I said hello," she said. "If you don't, teach one of the girls yourself." Hartwell stood on the platform and gave Clara a paper-folded crisp. "The deposition copy," he said. "The coroner's correction. The undertaker's ledger extract with the inked name. The register line, copied by Pike. Keep them where your boys can't chew them." He looked at Thomas and Eli and at the way their hair lay in two different directions, as if already disagreeing about the world. "When they're old enough, tell them the river doesn't care about names," he said. "Tell them a man can make the river care a little if he holds the right thing at the right time." He tipped his hat and then reached out awkwardly and touched the carved star on the cradleboard with one finger. "That is a good mark," he said. "It points up." The train pulled. The platform slid backward like a page turning. Hartwell got smaller, then thin, then a line, then a dot. Calico raised both arms and did not wave because waving would admit endings, and she was not admitting any today. Beyond the station, a ridge ran like a knuckle against the sky. On that ridge, too far for Clara to see, a man stood and did not move until smoke had erased the train and the noise had become a memory. He turned then and walked toward a campfire he would light alone. He would sit by it and carve a second little star on a piece of hide and tie a hair-thin thread of blue cloth through it. He would speak to no one about it and never be lonely once while he did. A week east, in a town where the river ran like a polite guest and boys skipped stones instead of warnings, Clara rented a room with a window that knew trees. June's name opened a door and Ruth's opened a cupboard. The babies grew louder and much more beautiful. The ring on the red thread hung from a nail beside the bed. Some nights Clara looked at it and felt nothing at all, which is its own kind of healing. Some mornings she touched it and said, "You were the wrong part of the right life," and fed the boys breakfast. When the first snow of that different winter began, flurries like ash that smelled clean, Clara sat by the window and embroidered a small star in red thread on the corner of each boy's blanket. Her stitches were neat. She had her mother's hands when she did careful work, and her father's when she lifted heavy things. She tucked a scrap of blue cloth into each star point, because men had taught her the value of color. That season, she told Thomas and Eli a story about a desert that tried to eat them, and a river that tried to finish the job, and a man who told the water no, and a woman who told words no, and a handful of paper that stopped lying. She told it the way a person tells a map, plain, with the dangerous corners marked. Months later, a letter came in a rough hand that tried to make polite shapes. It had traveled through 3 wrong towns, and one right one to find her was from Reverend Pike. He wrote that the parish had lost 2 families and gained 3 since she'd gone. He wrote that the register still smelled faintly of sage and that the page with the amendment had been read out loud in a Sunday service when a man tried to say something ugly. He wrote that Mr. Pritchard had started signing his name like a confession. He wrote that Hartwell had been posted elsewhere for cause unclear, and that before he left, he stood outside the mission and stared at the bell rope and did not touch it, and then walked away as if it had rung in him. He wrote one more line in the margin that he did not sign. "I married 2 women last week who had no fathers at the ceremony." I wrote their names large. A year later, a trader brought a winter count hide through town. It held a small star painted near a line that could be floodwater. The trader said, "This mark is the year the flood returned a name." Clara bought a scrap beside it, a corner where the star's point had been pricked through to test the bonal. She hung it near the ring and the red thread. She sat for a long time, looking at the 3 small witnesses. She did not need them to believe what she knew. She liked that they stood beside her anyway. When the boys learned to walk, they fell as boys do, and laughed as boys do, and bled as boys do. Clara wiped their knees and told them that blood is not a promise, just a leak. When they learned to ask why, she gave them answers shaped like roads. When they learned to look at maps, she showed them the place where the wash had been, and the mission, and the ridge, and the pass. And she put her finger on the North Star and said, "This one does not move. When you don't know your way, you look there. It remembers for you." She did not say the name of the man who had taught her that the first time. She did not need to. Memory is not a ledger. It is a fire kept alive with small sticks. Years after, when Thomas and Eli were old enough to carry water without spilling and to look a liar in the eyes, a packet arrived with no return name. Inside were 4 folded sheets, a copy of the sheriff's deposition with the word person dark and unashamed now, a rubbing of the undertaker's ledger, where Lewis Cutter had bit into the paper and could not be worked loose. The coroner's inquest with unknown, lined out so thoroughly the paper had almost torn, and a small square of blue cloth, old and frayed, tied around a scrap of hide with a star burned into it. Thomas asked, "Mama, who sent this?" Clara said, "A man who knows that paper and hide and cloth are only as strong as the hand that ties them together." Eli asked, "What do we do with it?" Clara said, "We keep it near the door." On a spring day when the creek said good things to rocks, Clara walked with the boys to a hill above the new town. She carried a braid of red thread, looped through a ring, and a small pouch of sage, and the hide star. She set the ring in a crack in a granite shoulder, pressed the sage beside it, and laid the hide where sun could warm it. She stood back. She did not pray out loud. She did not close her eyes. She had prayed enough with her eyes open to trust that kind best. Thomas slipped his hand into hers. Eli did the same. "We go home now," she said. "Where is home?" one asked. "Where you can tell the truth and sleep," she said. "Where paper doesn't make you smaller and water doesn't try to name you." At night, after the boys slept, she would sometimes sit by the window and watch the North Star through the elm branches. Its stubborn pin, a comfort. She would speak into the quiet, soft enough not to wake anyone, strong enough to reach ridge and mission and wash if sound cared to travel that far. "I left a braid by the rock," she would say, "for the man who will not be welcomed at every fire." The wind would move the curtain a little, as if it had understood. She did not ask for answers. She had enough of those for anyone's life. This story comes from papers that tried to be brave and sometimes failed, and from a river that took 2 debts and settled them its own way. It comes from a parish register with a sage pouch in its spine, an undertaker's book forced to grow a conscience, a coroner's form that learned a name, and a sheriff's deposition that stopped pretending a woman could be pledged like a wagon. If you ever open a ledger and find a word scraped thin, look at the hand that holds the knife, and remember the small star on a corner of hide that outlives ink. If this tale stayed with you, tell me where you're watching from. Share it with someone who loves frontier legends, and subscribe for more hard-won stories of courage, mercy, and justice on the edges of the map.